Hello, Out Bosses. Rhodes Perry here, and welcome to this week's episode of The Out Entrepreneur, a weekly podcast where I get to interview today's most inspiring LGBTQ bosses crushing it in business. This show is a special one as it celebrates the 100th episode of the podcast. Every week for the past 2 years, I've released an episode to the 35,000 of you wonderful Out Bosses, and it's been quite the adventure. While today marks a huge milestone for the show, it's also a somber day as we recognize the 19th annual International Transgender Day of Remembrance. The day is observed annually on November 20th to memorialize those who have been murdered as a result of transphobia and often its intersections with racism and sexism. It's also a day where we demand that the continued violence that so many of our communities endure must end. In honor of this very important day, I'm airing a live panel discussion I moderated in Portland, which features a group of incredible transgender and non-binary advocates and allies working to improve the lives and well-being of our transgender and non-binary friends and family. The panel took place on October 9th at Portland State University, and it featured the following community leaders: Gita Lewis, who is a writer and artist; Alexis Woods, who is a speaker and community advocate; Max Baela, who is a community advocate and employee at Biketown; and Mary Rowe, who is an HR director and awesome ally. During the live recording, these inspiring community advocates shared how workplace barriers adversely impact the health and well-being of transgender and non-binary people. They also offered several very, very important strategies on how to dismantle them. As a business leader, if you've ever wondered if or how you could play a role in expanding economic opportunities to transgender and non-binary people, then this live podcast recording is just for you. For now, please sit back, enjoy the panel discussion, and continue being your authentic selves 100% of the time.
For trans and non-binary folks, as well as Eugene and Salem. A lot of the reasons why is we have great laws, we have great policies, right? And the climate that we're in, a lot of people who aren't from here are moving here, and that's a good thing, right? And we still have work to do. And I think these numbers that we'll just kind of show quickly, because I know not everybody is into the numbers, are pretty stark. So of the 20,000, if we're just looking at economic well-being here in the state of Oregon, we've got about 30% of trans and non-binary people are living in poverty as the way that the United States defines that. And that is more than double the national average of 12%, just to kind of give some context. So while there aren't as many trans and non-binary people in the state, in the country, there's an overrepresentation of trans people who are experiencing poverty, okay? And then when you're looking at the unemployment rate, which feeds into poverty, that rate is also more than double the national average. Trans and non-binary people are 4 times more likely than cisgender folks to earn less, to earn less than $10,000 a year. So just kind of, again, putting that into context, the numbers are pretty stark. And then when you're starting to look at workplace experiences, about 83% experience some form of mistreatment on the job. Again, that's here in the state of Oregon, recognizing that most trans and non-binary people are living in pretty urban areas. So while we have done a lot, there's still obviously more to do to really understand, what is this disconnect between these awesome laws, these awesome policies, and the reality when we show up to work every day, it's not so great. So the good news, and I'm more about empowerment, is that there's a lot of good work that's underway in a lot of major cities. I'm just sharing some examples on the West Coast of what's going on in Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles. The National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, they're based in DC. They now have this National Trans and Non-Binary Business Advisory Board. And what they're trying to do is understand what's working well for these models in different cities and trying to help other urban areas, mostly where other LGBT chambers are, to kind of adapt this work. And so I am on the board of the local LGBT chamber here. For those who aren't familiar, it's called the Portland Area Business Association. So we're trying to look at, okay, these other cities have figured out some good things. We need to figure out what we can do. And one of the first things that we did is we needed to educate ourselves to understand what was happening. Because while some of us are members of trans and non-binary communities, we're one person, one perspective, and that's not enough, right? So we wanted to reach out to community. So in April, we had a community listening session, And what we wanted to do is really understand what the climate was like and educate community. So we wanted to look at leaders, like our mayor, the county chair, as well as the governor, just to understand if Portland is the 26th largest city in the country, population-wise, yet it's the 7th largest city for trans and non-binary people. Not only do we have a responsibility to do more, but we have a great opportunity to be a model and to try to inspire other jurisdictions to try to do similar. Because there's a lot of good people who want to do the right thing. I mean, just the interest in this event alone is really affirming, I think, for that reality. So one of the ways that what we're trying to do is just to do some community engagement and say, if you're really interested in the topic, we're looking for more folks from community, more allies, more champions to help us along the way. If any of this inspires you along, especially once we start having the panel discussion, we need your help too. So we're really glad that you're here. So how we're educating, we did the listening session in April. We had a report. So how many people RSVP'd? Everybody? Okay. Well, if you didn't RSVP, that's okay. There, as Gita was saying, there's a phone book of a report that has a lot of really good findings in it. But yeah, there's an executive summary if you're not into reading all of it. So please read that report. And yeah, so we're here for community engagement. So just to kind of say what our goal is, like our long-term goal is we want to dismantle workplace barriers for trans folks. And we believe that we can get there by having events like this and doing community engagement. So our number one goal is we want people to network, to build relationships after our conversation. We also want to share a little bit more about what workplace barriers are, what they look like, share a lot of the actions. And what we'll be doing at PABA is just talking as one organization of what we're committed to do. And I hope for folks that are affiliated with other organizations in the room, we'd love to hear what you're doing if you're doing more work. So there'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end, as well as if you work for a nonprofit, if you work for a larger corporation business, and you have the ability to kind of say, hey, we should be doing something, and you need ideas. This is the right audience. So we're here to support each other. These are the community-informed recommendations. So they're in the report. So it's a little bit of a sneak peek. I'm not going to go through in detail all of them, other than just to kind of point out a few key points here, which is under leadership development opportunities. Out of the 50 trans non-binary people who came to the event, they wanted to see more leadership development programs that were specifically designed for trans and non-binary people, mentorship opportunities, peer-to-peer support, specifically job training programs, entrepreneurship programs that at least were culturally specific and welcoming of trans folks and really centering from the margins. So keeping in mind that when we saw those numbers for trans non-binary people broadly, when you compound that with people of color, with trans women, with non-binary folks, people of different abilities, so on and so forth, those numbers become more and more stark, right? So we wanted programs that considered those intersections of identity. There was also a strong calling to build a stronger movement of local leaders. So for trans folks that have good ideas, they want to start a project, a program, really providing and pushing funders at the local, regional, or national level to really back those folks that have good ideas and support them. So that's just some of the recommendations. So I'm urging people to take a look at that report in more detail. But you all came to hear from panelists, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to jump into some questions. We'll probably talk for about 40 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So everybody who has comments or questions, we're going to engage you as well. Okay, so really quickly, who's on the panel, and our panelists will share more about their background when we kind of go down the line here. But I want to introduce Gita Lewis, who is our first panelist. And Gita is a writer, artist, and Q Center board member. So we're really fortunate to have you on the panel tonight. So thanks for being here. To Gita's left is Alexis Woods. And Alexis is a speaker, community advocate, educator, works at Bradley Engel, just got a promotion, woot woot, so that's awesome. And then to Alexis's left is Max. Max, I'm going to mispronounce your last name. Did you want to say that?
Bialia.
Thank you. Okay. And Max is an operations associate at Biketown. And to Max's left is Mary Rowe, who is HR director at Metro. So thank you all so much for being here. What we're first going to do is we're going to jump into talking about just what workplace barriers look like. And Gita, I wanted you to first just kind of share a little bit more about who you are. And if you could, help us understand what some of the most challenging workplace barriers that trans folks endure that laws and policies alone just can't address.
All right, so I got to Oregon in 2006, needed a place to stay, wound up on the couch of a friend of a friend, and knew I had to get a job, any job. And since you can't pump your own gas in Oregon, that was one of them. It didn't last long, but long enough for me to get a couple of other jobs, because between 2006 and 2014, I made between $6,500 and $7,200 per year, and still managed to live indoors. And while I did that, I did it with a minimum of 2, sometimes 3 jobs, but they all paid crap. And that's the way it was. My first tax-paying job was in 1970. I hung out at the library so much that they hired me. 14 years old, and all of a sudden I had to pay taxes. And that's when you didn't get a Social Security card at birth. You only got one if you got a job, which meant there were a whole bunch of women that never got a Social Security card. Wow. So, with the exception of 1 year in my entire work history to date, I have either been underemployed or unemployed. One of the key challenges in my experience has been the lack of visual and vocal support of trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming employees. When it doesn't come directly from the top, that attitude is amplified by middle management and becomes entrenched in the behavior of everyone else working there. Anyone that wants to ignore, dismiss, or otherwise abuse LGBTQ hires seizes the day. And if you want to keep your job, you just hunker down and do the best you can. And that's what my experience has been, almost to this moment. So, does that answer your question?
Gita, thank you so much for sharing that. And our panelists are going to share some personal stories about. Just about some of the harder things that are day-to-day occurrence. And so I appreciate that. And for Alexis, if you could just kind of build a little bit off of some of those workplace experiences and share more about how being a trans or non-binary person can get more complicated when you think of other aspects of identity, like race or ability, geographic location.
I can actually speak very directly to that. I worked in law enforcement for 20 years. And I was good at it, and they thought I was good at it. And by the time I started to transition, I found out that I wasn't good enough to be kept around for that. I was the only black employee in the building, and so you equate that, and then I'm transitioning, and then, can't have that. I was told I was a distraction, even though I actually trained both my supervisor and that supervisor's boss. So I did a job for 15 years and then thought, oh yeah, they'll let me do this. I've been 15 years. I've been a great employee. I've been great. No, never been written up for a thing. And it took 2 weeks after they started wearing makeup that I was suspended. And because they couldn't actually catch anything for 2 months, I'd go back and they'd do an interview and they'd ask me a bunch of questions and I'd tell them the truth. And then they'd be screwed then because, if they can't catch me in a lie, they got to come up with something else. So they did this 4 times. And this was right at the beginning of my transition. So on the last day, the last meeting they called me to was actually the last day that I dressed as a male. Because I was like, okay, if you're going to fire me, you're going to fire me. You're not going to fire what I've been for 40 years. And so it was rather interesting because they wouldn't look anything but here. And they were freaking out the whole time. I was told that I could prove that they fired me for something that wasn't valid, but I couldn't prove that they fired me because I was trans. And so it just pretty much is just sitting there right now. And so then I went unemployed for 2 years, because here it is, I had this job for 15 years. I'm working in the criminal justice system, and I just need a job. I have 4 teenage boys, 2 of which are in college now, so not teenagers anymore. And I still support these. And so I went from making about $75,000 a year to nothing. And then when I go and I try to apply for a job, the first thing they do is they see person of color, they see trans, then they look at my qualifications and they're like, well, why are you even applying here? I'm like, because I need a job. I don't care. Because at that point, I was willing to take anything. And so it took about 2 years before I finally got a job. And of course, I was well overqualified. I was an overnight cook. I have training for years and I'm an overnight cook, because that's about all I could get. And then, of course, insurance was minimal. I could no longer cover my children on my insurance, because jobs like that don't exist where I was, where you get a job and they cover everything. Now I couldn't find a job and I cover everything. So when you add race and immigration status and ability, it gets that much more difficult to find employment. Immigration issues are because you have to have proof of a visa. Okay, well, yeah, some people give folks a job, but then they'll use those folks because, oh, well, you don't have proof of a visa, so I can get you to do anything. So they get well underpaid and they get no insurance. And so you have a large number of trans and non-binary folks working jobs where they don't offer insurance. And so they're paying out of pocket for surgeries and hormones and other things because you can't get a job that covers all that. And then, studies have shown with employers, if they can't pronounce the name, there goes the application first. If there's a certain medical issue or listing of anything at all, then they'll quickly slide down into the... So it increases it to a level that almost makes it close to impossible to find a job unless you hide. And that was just something I personally wasn't willing to do. Now, since then, no, I'm not an overnight cook. I'm currently the LGBTQ program coordinator at Bradley Angle for dealing with survivors of intimate partner violence and LGBTQ, which is a rather nice position to be in, but realizing that we are far short of that kind of work as well. So these culturally specific programs are going to be what we're going to need to even start employing folks and doing the things that we know how to do.
Thank you for that. And I think one of the themes that I heard from both Gita and you, Alexis, is this feeling of having to hide in order to survive, or feel that you can have some security around your job and not be yourself. And yet, when you were working for the police, you saw kind of the writing on the wall of what was about to happen, and you were able to show up as your authentic self. And, and 2 years of unemployment, and this is a reality that is not uncommon for many trans folks. So I appreciate you sharing that. So for Max, so you're working at Biketown. You've worked for lots of other employers, and I'm curious, when we're thinking about workplace barriers, they obviously show up different for all of us. And so I'm interested in hearing your experience for folks that are more masculine of center, where privilege might show up and where it doesn't show up, because I think that that's sometimes invisible, and I think that might be helpful for the audience.
Well, I came out as trans while working for Biketown, and they were exceptionally supportive. And I would say that some privileges I noticed right away was like being taken more seriously, having people respond to my emails more often and more quickly. I think that some things in the workplace that maybe where that privilege doesn't translate is like still carrying a lot of emotional support from my male coworkers, and definitely situations where I feel like I'm not taken seriously, or my opinion, especially about like queer issues, isn't taken seriously or authentically. And I had a workplace where it was primarily women, and it was interesting there because I felt like there was a lot of privilege given to me, but especially when it came to voicing my opinion on trans issues and on queer issues, I felt like that was very dismissed. And with my current situation at Biketown, they've been very supportive, and I've had a clear pathway to leadership opportunities. And I feel like I've been successful regardless of my gender identity. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that what you're talking to definitely highlights how sexism shows up in the workplace when you experience kind of what life was like before you might have transitioned and then thereafter. And then also some of the challenges of speaking about your experience as someone who's trans. And that, I mean, it sounds like that experience wasn't really taken seriously, or people might have felt a little uncomfortable out of their comfort zone. So thanks for sharing that. And Mary, so you're our HR director. So you have a little bit of a different experience. And I'm interested from your perspective, what you have seen around workplace barriers throughout your career. For trans, non-binary folks that have been on staff at different employers for you.
Okay. Well, good evening. And for me, when I was asked to be on this panel, and Rose got a few emails from me saying, I'm a little bit intimidated here. I'm not an expert on transgender, non-binary issues, but I'm definitely an advocate in the workplace and have seen a lot from the HR perspective and how do we make a more inclusive workplace. And I've learned over the years, one of my favorite quotes from a prior boss was, I reserve the right to get smarter. And, that's become one of my favorite quotes because I do think that, I want to learn all the time and learn from individuals. So I've spent 30 years in public sector HR. I'm pretty passionate about HR work for some reason unbeknownst to me. And I'm also passionate about public sector work because, we're the biggest nonprofit out there. We do and should be doing good work for the community, which means we need to represent the community. And we can only do that if we have an inclusive workplace. And most of us spend more time at work, than we spend at home awake, So the workplace should be someplace that's pleasant to come to, that you feel supported and encouraged so you can do your best work. And I know that that's not the case for a lot of people. And so over the years, I have worked with people in the transgender community that are transitioning in the workplace. And, one thing that the question about barriers, to me, one of the biggest barriers that I've heard from other HR colleagues and in other organizations is like, well, that's not an issue for our organization. We're out in the suburbs, or we're either too small or whatever. And it's like, wake up, folks. There's probably people from the, LGBTQ community amongst, your staff. I would guarantee it pretty much in any workplace, but they're probably just afraid to come out, So that's one barrier, is just that denial. And then, dare I say, well-intentioned, well-educated white folks, I think, are a big barrier. And I have heard more discriminatory comments come from people that are well-educated liberals saying, oh, they just know I'm joking. And it's like, no. And it's been kind of interesting being an out lesbian HR director and having discriminatory comments made. And I'm like, you just said that to the HR director, And the first couple times it happened, it really took me by surprise. And then I, quit being I quit having that shock and awe factor from it. And so people, I'm like, if they're saying that to me and they don't realize what they're saying, what are they saying to their coworkers? And thank God people are forgiving if somebody's making an attempt. But if you're going to mispronoun, people over and over and over again, or use an old name, or not, at some point, it's not acceptable. It's that intention behind it. And so I think when people try to just say, well, I know what you're going through, it's like, no, don't ever pretend you know what the other person's going through and be dismissive like that. And to me, it's that lack of really listening to try to understand the person that really becomes the biggest barrier in the workplace.
I'm really grateful that you have empathy in your position. I've worked with a number of different HR folks where that sometimes is missing, and I think like that curiosity of always learning is really important. And that what you had raised around, it's not an issue in our workplace. That is just something that I've heard again and again, and it almost goes back to what Gita and Alexis were saying, where that's when people are hiding, when you can't show up and be authentic. So I thank you for sharing that and some of the realities that your peers in HR are still struggling with. So we've talked a bit about the workplace barriers and kind of shifting now to guidance, right? Like what would we say to other folks in HR or CEOs or folks that are leading up different nonprofit organizations on how to make it better? And Gita, I originally wrote this question as kind of biggest cultural failures for local employers, but I'm going to walk that back just to say, what are some of the shortcomings that you see or have heard about locally here in Portland with employers where they have the best intentions, but it's just falling short? And what kind of guidance would you give those employers?
To start with, having the best intentions is like having none at all. It's really about follow through and commitment. The things I've encountered, first of all, I cannot overstate that the biggest problem, the biggest obstacle starts at the top. And the good news is that's where the biggest change can happen. That's where substantive change can happen. So I've really kind of come into my own in terms of my age and my authenticity. I have so much less to lose now. I lost my fear of death when I was about 7, because I was born in the 50s. So just the fact that I'm older than 40 and a Black trans woman is a radical act, just sitting here. So yay for me, but looking at change, being the change. Every time I would be on a shift with coworkers who were also trans, which was kind of odd to see so many. We made up about, I would say 15% of our little work area. I worked in a deli, in a supermarket. So on any random day, there'd be 3 or 4 of us. And I'm like, whoa, and then of course there'd be all those other people. And 3 of us were people of color. So I was like, wow. But they were still new in their skin. And we continue to deal with customers of privilege. These are the upper middle class who actually go out and shop. Because we have a really exotic deli, they are shopping for prosciutto and soppressata and all those other fancy Italian things that are like $50 a pound. And think nothing of misgendering. So what I just decided one day, keeping in mind the corporate policy is to always be deferential to the customer. The customer's always right, the customer's always white, whatever, right? But I just would say if someone said, oh, excuse me, and misgender somebody, I'd say, oh, wow, look who's helping you. He is so awesome. You should see what he does. He does this and he does that. A lot of times, the customer would just hear like the third or fourth he and finally wake up. And they'd be quiet. They were very in their moment, in their, oh, I'm going to make this special dish that I saw on OPB, and I'm going to do this. And all of a sudden, they're not as talkative. And I'm like, I don't miss that. That's okay. And I would hope, falsely, that my coworkers would do the same for me. Because I could see in them the desire to correct somebody and then not do it. And I just got tired of watching that. And so rather than jump down somebody's throat and make it a bigger deal, I just would do that. And I would overstate it enough that they would get it. Oh, and there'd be that light. One day, I just did it for myself, and very quickly in passing, not making a thing out of it. I said, they would just misgender me. And I said, well, actually, it's she. And I got permission to put Ms. Gita on my work apron where everyone else had to make name tags. And I just said, if you miss this, bright red letters on a background, oh hell, you are really in your own world. Well, it still happened. So I corrected somebody again. I said, oh, no, it's she. And they were over apologetic, that other side of it, that liberal white guilt, because here I am, this black woman who's trans, and I called them out on it, and I just kept rolling, just like that was nothing. And they fell apart. And I'm like, you're doing my thing, and I'm not doing it. So what else do you need? And they just took their thing. They leave, come back 10 minutes later. It's busy. They have purchased a bouquet of roses. And I'm like, you really didn't need to do that. I love roses, thank you, but you really didn't need to do that. And so I said, I'm going to share these with all of my coworkers. So I just undid them and spread them all over the deli, and the management comes by and go, what the heck is this? I said, this is customer appreciation. And left it at that. Customer came over, adores us. And I said, oh, good, keep up the good work. So they didn't need to hear the whole story. I got to have roses that actually stayed in that area for 3 days. They didn't just take them down. So it was awesome. But it was another illustration for me that it's not enough to want the change and to expect to see the change, but I have to be the change. And I keep reinforcing that lesson that I got from being at the Q Center as a board member, which I retired just this spring. So officially, I'm not on the board anymore. It still feels like it. I show up doing stuff. And the same thing with Basic Rights Oregon, another place that I volunteer at. But encouraging everyone within an organization to lead by example is how you're going to bring a cultural change in the workplace. It's not enough to have a policy and to say, oh, well, we have a policy, so it's fixed. It's like, oh, we have a black president, racism is over. No, that's not a thing. Every cultural change that encroached on cis, het, white, male privilege and power has had an adjustment period that for some crazy reason is still going on. Okay, just having people of color in the same workspace, having women who are still paid less but are at least in the building, regardless of color, having pregnant women, having women with children at their workspace, all of these things. And I am old enough to see the growing pains of 55 years of, oh my God, they're wearing pants? What? And having all of this kerfuffle about it. So this next frontier of just let's let go of the gender thing is about as scary for the apex workplace person is about as scary as reading the demographic projections for the coloring of America. One of my favorite t-shirts is that the future is brown, feminist, and queer as FU whatever. And that is a truth, and that is very scary. And for people who are resisting things that just encroach people of color, women, all of these things that are like chipping away at their power and their privilege, they're scared to death and they're resisting. And that's not just the men, but the women who are trying to take advantage of that by proxy. It's easier to be a gender-conforming white woman who supports the man than to stand up and put what little you feel you have at risk. That's not a thing, and that's not okay. I'm not a big fan of allies. Not everybody likes when I say that. What I'm looking for are co-conspirators. Okay? You can't just be on the sidelines. You can't wear a pin. You can't do a button. T-shirts don't cut it. Okay? You need to get out there and be the change. And walk that walk and talk that talk every day, not just at the rallies, not just when everybody's going, oh, gee, she power. And oh boy, work power, whatever it is, okay? Yes, that part is important, but if that's all you do, if all you do is click like on Facebook, it's like you didn't even phone it in. Need to be there. All of us need to be there. And that's just another lesson I learned, being more engaged. And now I'm working at Bro as a volunteer. So it's like I never quit volunteering, along with my day job and trying to go to school now as of this September. Yay!
That, I think the example going to the question of kind of cultural, like where employers can grow, the example of kind of the misgendering, messing up the names, the pronouns, and the onus that you are the change. I really like what you were saying about co-conspirators. For allies going that extra step, when seeing that happen, what would be such a lift for you would be to have other people intervene in that moment instead of having to always do that. So I think that's a great example. For Alexis, on just kind of guidance for employers. So if you were to grade local employers, what would be some of the things, not everything, but just some, like 2 or 3 kind of items that you immediately would kind of evaluate to make sure that there's more effort to make that kind of cultural shift to be more welcoming of trans, non-binary folks?
First, I was comment on what Gita said as far as co-conspirators, and I like that. I've seen it read somewhere that there's actors, there's allies, and then there's accomplices. Actors are the folks, they sit back, they talk the talk. Oh yeah, you should do this. Oh yeah, you should do that. Yeah, but they're not the ones voting for these measures. They're not the ones standing up. And then you have the allies who said, well-intended, trying to do some things, but these are the folks who overstep their boundaries because you cannot make yourself an ally. The people you are working with make you the ally. And then there's the accomplice. That's what everybody wants. You want somebody to stand by your side. You want that accomplice. As far as what I would grade local businesses on, first off, you can't simply say you are inclusive, but you don't put anything in your policy saying you are. I sat through a presentation where a group was talking about this empowerment group for women. And when they were done, I politely asked, does that include trans women? Well, it doesn't say it doesn't. I'm like, well, that's not what I asked. Does it include trans women? And the answer I got back was, well, we don't have the training for that. I didn't realize you had to be trained to talk to me. I can be a little odd sometimes, but you don't need training. And so, of course, I'm offended by this whole concept. I'm like, okay, see, here it is. You're so afraid of who I am that you think you need to be trained to deal with me. And that's what a lot of employers say. They say, well, we need training behind it. No, you need to act like a human being. That's not a difficult thing. And then secondly, it's your HR has to have somebody there for people to go to. Somebody they can go to and say, if they're transitioning on the job, they need to be in a position, it needs to be somewhere in their policy that they can do this. Not simply saying it's okay, put it in writing. And you have to have policies, strict policies regarding how you deal with people who violate these personnel rules. You can't simply say, well, don't badmouth people. No, you need to point out that if it is in fact regarding somebody's sexual orientation, their gender identity, that there's specific things that happen. You can't simply say, well, we just don't allow it. Well, what happens? Well, we haven't determined that yet. We're just waiting for it to happen. No, if you said it before, it's less likely to happen. And then we're talking about just the sheer numbers. It's always, well, we got one. Oh, we got that one. Like, what do you mean that one? It's not an it, okay? We're talking about a person, and you cannot refer to, well, we've got one here, and that's supposed to make everybody feel better. But as a business, if you do have a person who's trans or non-binary, you cannot make them the spokesperson for everything about that business. You can't say, oh yeah, well here, you can come talk to trans folk, we're inclusive, and make them all of a sudden the poster child of your inclusivity. I used to have that for being the only black kid in most of my white classes growing up. It was always, I was meant to answer the question for every black person on the planet. Are you kidding? I can't do that any more than I can answer every question for every trans person in the community or trans colored person in our community or two sitting right next to you. I cannot answer questions for Gita. So employers, you need to ask the individual person when they come through the door, what kind of supports they're going to need, what kind of things are going to make them more comfortable in that work environment. And secondly, pay them. Pay them the same amount that you pay everybody else.
Those are excellent points. And I think that proactive piece, right, rather than waiting of like, well, we don't have any trans or non-binary people on the staff, so we'll get there when we need to. It's chances are you probably do, especially if you're a larger corporation. And I think that's really, really solid advice. And especially in terms of positions, making sure that there's pay equity across positions rather than expecting trans or non-binary people to be grateful to have a job, right? I think that's really great. So Max, Biketown has a really solid reputation for recruiting trans, non-binary people. And I'm curious, what kind of advice would you give to other employers in the region on kind of just maybe adapting some of what's going well at Biketown? Any kind of guidance comes to mind there?
Well, I think a great thing about Biketown is it has the startup feel, and we were really able to create the culture we wanted from the ground up. But we do have some policies that are in practice, people write in their gender. If anybody comes to us who's not cis, we ask them what they need, and we find ways to support them. Our healthcare is trans inclusive, so that's a pretty big deal. And I think the biggest thing for us is like my cis coworkers educate themselves. Like I'm not expected to educate them. They're preemptive about that. You know, I knew that it was safe for me to come out there. That it was safe for me to have that conversation with my boss and my HR person, because they already did that. And like the amount of times that like my general manager has gone to bat for me, or like if something's not getting done for me, that might be because of, you know, some oppression, like she's on it. And like I don't have to fight every single battle and teach every single lesson. And I think that's the biggest thing that workplaces can do, is be preemptive about that education for cis folks. And yeah, like I think we've heard it a lot here, like you can't depend on us to do the fighting for ourselves and the educating of everybody who comes in the door, and bearing microaggression after microaggression.
Thank you. And for Mary, in terms of the concrete changes Metro has made to be more welcoming of trans and non-binary people, what are some of those changes, and maybe what more could be done, especially to more intentionally recruit from our communities?
Yeah, so it's probably been about 9 years ago now when I became aware of some of the barriers to healthcare for transgendered, non-binary people, that we went to our insurance providers and demanded a change in the insurance plans. And they came back with these policies, and I looked at the language and I was like, no, this is not going to work. And so Basic Rights Oregon was really helpful, and we went to them, and they were helpful in reviewing the policies, reviewing the language. So with us, so it wasn't just us, and we had more voice there, and worked with our insurance carriers and got those plans changed. And unfortunately, like we didn't have a single stall restroom in our main building. And the unfortunate part, not only did we not have it, but it took over a year to get through the budget process to get it. But we did. And, some of us stayed on it until, we weren't going to let that slide. So there's some things like that we've done. Certainly any claims of harassment, discrimination. I've worked with some employees that are transitioning in the workplace around what kind of support that they need, because each person's going to be different. Right now, one of the things that we're working on is, if for supervisors, these are some things to say, to not say, to do when you know that somebody in your work team is transitioning, and here's ways to help support that person in that transition, and ways to, which basically a lot of comes down to holding the other team members accountable for their language and all. But we're also working on then making sure that having another document for individuals that are transitioning or transgendered, have transitioned already, that will help them understand what resources are available. We had a situation recently where someone's going through their year of counseling in order to have top surgery, and they didn't realize that any of this was going to be covered by FMLA. And so I've often found that people that need the resources don't understand what they are. So I want to make sure that we have some information out there like, yeah, these services, you've got rights for family medical leave, or you can have your name changed on the email. We'll put any name you want on the email. You can have your name changed on your ID badge. Maybe we can't do it on the paycheck until you bring us the legal documentation that your name has been changed, you have a marker, but we can certainly change it other places that are actually far more visible than your paycheck. But somebody may not know how to navigate that, or as one person told me, they were exhausted because they had been through this so many places, not just in the workplace, but trying to navigate the medical system, the DMV, the this and the that. And so to come and think, okay, who do I have to go talk to get my name changed on my email? And then where else does it have to change on the message on my phone, on a greeting here, and then I've got it on my ID badge, and who do I have to go see, which is a different person. So we want to make sure that we make that as easy for people as possible. So kind of like, okay, here's your concierge service. Come to HR, we'll have people trained. We know how to navigate these things and can take over some of that for a person that's just exhausted at this point of having to always go back and explain the story and go through this conversation over and over and over. So those are some of the things we have done, are doing, and like I say, just learning all the time what each individual needs and trying to address the needs of those individuals instead of saying, well, all transgendered, non-binary people, treat them like this or treat them like that, or it's each individual has their own particular story and their needs to feel supported in the workplace.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you mentioned kind of having a specific plan, general guidelines, but really treating a person as a person of what their specific needs are. So you were talking more from your perspective of working within HR at Metro, but kind of zooming out, you had mentioned Metro is the largest nonprofit, in the region.
Government agencies are the largest.
Okay. Yeah. You said nonprofit. I was like, it's government, nonprofit. Okay. It's big. Metro is big. So when you're thinking about the services that you're offering or the impact that you're having on our communities as a whole, like looking at trans and non-binary folks, what role maybe does Metro have in expanding economic opportunities for us? Can you speak a little to that?
Yeah. I think Metro in particular has a unique role. I say we're not your grandmother's government agency. We don't provide police, fire, library services. I also got my first job in the library in the 70s. And, we're working on affordable housing. We're working on transportation needs. How do you, instead of having these mass transportation corridors that go to Tiger Gresham, how do we create a sense of place in these communities to address some climate change issues so we aren't generating as much pollution as a community? So different things like that. The Metro's got a unique role that I think, and we've really stepped up our game and are still working to improve as far as our strategic plan to advance racial equity and bringing more voices and really convening community cohorts to work with us and stay with us on some of these changes in the region that we're working on. So that's one way as far as trying to build up economic prosperity in the region. And then we do run a number of different businesses and venues, and most people don't even realize all the businesses that we provide in the region, like we run the zoo and convention center and Has Waste, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of living wage jobs that we have, and as one person who's transitioning told me recently, is that they were really grateful that they were able to do that and stay with the same employer because of the unemployment rates that you were citing earlier. And, we've had some people that have transitioned and unfortunately felt that they wanted to leave and that they didn't want to stay in the same workplace. But we've had other people that have gone to a different department, and it's like, okay, I'm going to create a new identity but stay with the same employer and keep the same benefits. And there's so many different jobs. We have actually a number of people that have found these very interesting career paths and been able to stay with us and keep their benefited jobs. And also, I think certainly we can do more to educate people in the community as far as the jobs that we have available. Metro is kind of the best kept secret as far as all the different opportunities we have. And that's one thing, a growth area for us, is to continue to increase our outreach efforts for recruitment and for jobs.
So maybe that's one area of collaboration around intentional kind of employment pipeline for trans and non-binary folks.
Definitely.
Kind of being more visionary in the future, right?
Yeah.
And so Max, on that as well, kind of like Biketown is a part of Nike in some way. So I'm guessing or what I would like to ask is, thinking about some of these bigger corporations, like Nike, but maybe Biketown itself. What can those kind of corporations do to intentionally recruit from trans, non-binary communities, especially when you look at resiliency studies, you look at the value that we bring to the workplace, how much, there could be more research done on that. So we could probably talk about our own experiences there, but I'm curious, what might you say to an employer like Biketown to be more intentional about that, or to other corporations?
Well, Nike just gives us money so that we put the logo on the bikes.
It's truth.
But yeah, I think that something I see with a lot of when a corporation wants diversity, it's a lot of entry-level employment, low-paying jobs, and there's not really a clear pathway to something better. And I think that a better way of doing that is putting, people in leadership positions and starting there. And all those little policies add up. As you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, it wasn't a big deal to get my email changed. It wasn't a big deal to change all those little things. And I didn't have to do the work on my own. There was somebody there to do it for me, and somebody to show me other places I could go to get other things done. And when I didn't know how my health insurance worked, there was somebody there to explain it to me. And I love going to work every day because there's people there like me. And that's really cool. Often I feel alone, or there's not space, and I go to work and I know that I'm not alone, and that there's lots of space for me, and that my coworkers support me, and not just support me, but celebrate who I am. And the smaller you are, I think the easier it is to foster that sort of culture. And I think that's why, especially for larger businesses and larger corporations, that's why it's important to start from leadership rather than, let's hire a bunch of entry-level employees that make $15 an hour. And
yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And it goes back to, I think, what Gita was talking about with it starts with leadership. And so it could be helpful to have a leadership team that's more representative of our communities. Another point that you shared was kind of the inverse of what we learned at the listening session. So we had around 50 trans non-binary folks that were at this listening session. And by and large, for folks that were working for someone else, there was this experience of being the one or the only. So the power, of just working with one other person who happens to be trans or non-binary on the team, you're speaking to that camaraderie and the power that comes with that. So I think that's really important. Just to show what the other side looks like. So Alexis, you're working at Bradley Angle, so you have probably a good lens of the nonprofit community. And I'm curious, what role do you see other nonprofits in the area playing to really support trans, non-binary folks, especially in terms of getting connected to jobs or entrepreneurship programs, things of that nature?
One thing I did notice is that, especially in Portland area, it seems that nonprofits seem to be more successful at hiring trans and non-binary folks than most of your for-profit businesses. And I found that a lot of them are easy to, you can go to their website and the support is right there. It's written, it's specific, it says it. I don't know, I worked for a public entity, and like I said, transitioning was not going to happen in a business of that size, especially for the state government. But since joining the workforce again, all three of my employers were all nonprofits. In all three of those locations, I felt comfortable as far as me being myself. Working for Bradley Angle is a interesting thing because I work in a business where everybody there is a cisgendered woman. And here I am, a trans woman. And I walked in there feeling, okay, this is going to suck. And in fact, I had actually turned down a job offer from them 7 months before I reapplied because I was scared of that. I didn't know how that was going to work. I didn't know how I was going to fit in that environment. And so I found out later that they were none too happy about me turning them down. I saw an opportunity and reapplied, and there I sit. And that's the kind of thing that other nonprofits are going to get to do. They're going to have to show by example and hire folks. And I saw interesting statistics that all things being equal, when applicants are reviewed by employers, more times than not, the trans or binary applicants are more qualified. And somehow they still don't seem to get the job. And those are in those bigger corporations. We don't have enough specific nonprofit organizations that sole purpose is to simply assist in finding work. I found a few online that were good. San Francisco's got a program called the Trans Employment Program, where literally that's what they do. They're a nonprofit and they help trans and non-binary folks build resumes, get job skills. They even have a computer class that teach computer programming. They have the Center for Gender Sanity and other resources for jobs. There's other websites where literally they go through the trouble of saying, okay, this would be a good fit for this type of person, good fit for that type of person. So somebody is going through the process of researching these companies and these people before they post it. So you know when you go to apply to it, you're not going to show up there and go, oh, she's thinking it's an oil rig because everybody there is not what you want. It is, and as far, and then those opportunities are huge. I mean, they're right there. Some of these bigger corporations, some of these other nonprofits can actually make these other satellite offices that do nothing but employment. That's what they do, and there's so much room for that. And right now it's heavily needed because we're still running into those things until somebody says, okay, no, we're going to work with this organization. We're going to tell them what is needed in order for people to feel welcome here. And then without that, people can say, well, we don't know. Oh, well, we haven't heard anything. Well, yeah, because nobody's going to come to your door as a trans or non-binary person and go to the HR department that for a company you don't work for and demand things. No, they're going to want to see that before they come to the door or you're not going. Because I know I'm not going anywhere, applying anywhere where I don't know what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think that speaking to what nonprofits are doing really well, which is really actively seeking out trans, non-binary folks, it would be interesting to see what those numbers are compared to maybe the corporate environment. And then also, in terms of services, what more nonprofits, especially general nonprofits that aren't specific to trans or non-binary folks, LGBT people broadly, around employment training programs or job seeking programs, and really doing due diligence to make sure if you're going to connect trans folks, non-binary folks to employment opportunities, that those employers are at least open to receiving the applications and giving you an honest shake, So I think those are all really, really good examples. Gita, you've been here for your whole life, right? Or close to it in Portland, right?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. For a while though, right?
A little bit.
Okay.
Since
All right.
06.
Okay, since 06. All right. So you have a good lay of the land of smaller businesses. And I'm curious, for those of us who are LGBT, if people are LGBT business owners in the room, what specifically can our businesses do to help trans and non-binary people specifically around getting connected to jobs or providing services, really expanding those economic opportunities?
Okay. So the first thing you need to realize is that as a business, small business, medium-sized business, those are the ones that are really part of the backbone of recovery. You know that. That's not a newsflash for you. For people who are genuinely interested in being part of the change, there are so many great organizations. Mary brought one up, Basic Rights Oregon. They are a wealth of information, and they are working on a myriad of fronts to really be the change. And it's why I volunteer with them. So they offer training. They offer all kinds of avenues to connect a business to state legislation that would support change for all businesses so that, I can't do this because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, that's not it, really. Particularly taking a page from other organizations like the one Alexis mentioned in the Bay Area that's about that kind of training and access to resources that really help place trans and non-binary, gender non-conforming people right in the center of employability. Because the truth of it is we're people. We want to work. We need to work. We want choices, and we want to be able to make better choices based on our ability to perform well. You would think they'd be beating down the door to come get us. That's not the case. What they see instead is extra baggage. So coming from a place of truly wanting to be help, reaching out to community organizations, Angelica Ross was one of my heroes, still is, not just an actress in awesome stuff like Pose for you people that get upper cable, but that she founded a tech company specifically to help train, educate, and then get jobs for gender nonconforming, non-binary, trans people. And they are about to celebrate 10 years of kicking butt doing that just this fall. So, wow. Looking out to your community for other kinds of partners. Everybody's sitting on a cache of jobs and ideas and connections and willing to swap in-kind services. Well, we need a space and you need some employees and we need some chairs and the next thing you know, it's like, one of those old movies where in the 30s where you saved the barn, you saved the theater because everybody pitched in and somehow managed to get Hollywood performance quality level costumes and an orchestra to do the show when they could have taken all that money and just saved the dang barn. But it's amazing how many co-conspirators you have in your community. Don't wait for them to come look for you. Chances are they're sitting at their table waiting for you to come get them. That's not how we're going to change stuff.
Thank you. I'm really happy that you mentioned Angelica Ross. So for folks that aren't familiar, I think it's Trans People Who Tech is the company's name, but it's basically like a coding school, right? So for folks that are wanting to start businesses, or if you have a business, I think that those are really great pieces of advice. For those of us at PABA, so that's the local LGBT chamber, I'm affiliated with them and a business owner. What we're trying to do is engage communities. So that's why we're having this event tonight. One of our commitments is to start a trans and non-binary business advisory council. So if this is something, if you identify as someone who's trans and non-binary, that's who we are prioritizing with having on this council. We're really looking to fellow community members to try to come together to replicate some of the good work that's happening in San Francisco and Seattle and other places. So if you're at this event and you haven't RSVP'd, there's some sign-up sheets just to leave your emails. So for folks that are interested in that, we would really, really love for you to be engaged. Behind me are the other recommendation or commitments that we're doing. I'm not going to go into detail with that because I want to open it up to Q&A in the room. And all of these commitments that are behind me are included in our report in the executive summary. So first couple of pages. So if you're interested in looking more into those items, that's available for your reading pleasure. So we're going to open it up. And before we kind of jump into the Q&A, just kind of, we want a code of respect. You've been super respectful and listening actively, and we appreciate that. Just as you ask your questions, if you're thinking about something to share, please share your name and your pronouns so that we can respect you. And just assume goodwill, as people are asking questions. Speak from your own experiences, so just use your I statements from things that you're seeing in community. If you like to talk a lot, just asking, ask your question and then maybe consider, why am I still talking? And if you're more of it goes for introverts too. So if you're more of an introvert, we want to hear from you. You're in the room, you have wisdom, and we want to learn from you. So this is our code of respect. So if you agree to that, we definitely making the floor available to your questions. And I'm happy to pass the microphone if people, yeah. So please don't be shy. I mean, our panelists are amazing. We've shared just the tip of the iceberg of some of what we know, and we could probably be here for a lot longer talking. So, yes.
You said you wanted my name and pronouns, right? My name is Mike. I use he, him pronouns. I work for Portland Public Schools. I'm a substitute, so I kind of get to float everywhere. But something that I see is that at the beginning of the year, we have all these trainings. We sign the thing that says, yes, we have a policy, like a written policy that's, inclusive and all that, and that's great. But Geeta, specifically what you said, it has to start from the top. But what is the difference, the fine line between performative allyship? Everyone puts a pink triangle on the windows and says, ta-da, we're all done. What's the difference between coming from the top, performative allyship, and places actually being the change, as you said?
All right, let me see if I understand your question. It's like you're responding to me talking about top down and having performative policy that really doesn't seem to do anything. I would challenge you to step up your game on both fronts with your peers and with your leadership, and just say, hey, you know what? This doesn't look like what this piece of paper says we're supposed to look like. What can I do? You really want to freak out a boss? Ask them what extra stuff you can do to make them look good. Holy crap. Sometimes they plot and then they give you the keys to the city.
Great response. So there was a question right up there.
My name is Jay. My pronouns are he or they. And so my question is this. Most of us have experienced significant trauma on our road to coming out and transitioning. And a lot of us have other things. We're people of color. We're disabled. We have checkered paths. Many of us on the road to, in acquiring all this trauma, have spotty work histories. This makes it, being trans just adds one more thing. The last time I was unemployed, post-transition, was laid off for transitioning. I was unemployed or underemployed for almost 2 years. And it was explicitly not only because of discrimination and no one wanting to hire a trans person, but because I had so much trauma in looking for a job while processing being laid off for being trans. And what can businesses do and organizations do to make this better?
First off, they just need to be aware of that and be honest with themselves that we exist. I had the fortunate job interview with a clothing apparel store. This was my second job interview full-time, and I had 2 male managers interview. One would ask me questions, go out in the hallway, they'd have a conversation. I couldn't hear exactly what the words were. Somebody else would come back in. That person would go out. There'd be another conversation. Now, this happened 4 times. That's common sense, that if you have somebody who's trans or gender nonconforming interviewing and you're playing that kind of act, you're just adding more to it. That can't happen. Business employers need to be aware and be more educated, not trained, educated on, and it's not a difficult thing to simply ask, how do I be supportive of another human being? How do I be supportive of a person who, we don't come into this world knowing everything about another person. We have to ask. We have to conversate. We have to communicate. It's not difficult. Businesses need to accept the fact that regardless of what a manager's personal feeling is about something, it's not going away. We're not going anywhere. I've had the unfortunate deal of dealing with some sort of job barrier since the day I was born. And like you said, I go to transition. Really? Do I really need this? Do I need one more thing that I got to fight to get through a job? I consider myself fortunate to have the work experience I did, because without it, I'd still be well underemployed. I just got lucky and found a nonprofit employer who looked at what I could do. There's an unreasonable amount of criminal background checks that businesses do on trans and gender nonconforming folks. There's law against that, but they do it nonetheless. They need to stop doing that. Majority of the people, and particularly trans women of color, are going to have a criminal record. That just happens because we have increased police contact, we have increased homeless rate, we have all these other added things to it. So yeah, with that comes a criminal record. And so these are things that employers have to actually consider a human being and look past what's on a piece of paper to determine what kind of employee they have. Because we all know that just because it looks good on paper doesn't mean you're going to be a good employee. Working for a police department like I did, and then having 4 officers go to prison in the short time that I was there, and I'm the problem? Okay. So those are the kind of things that need to happen.
In HR, one of the things that we're trained is like, do not let anybody tell you about any protected class, of which there are many, particularly in Oregon. So if somebody mentions a religion, mentions a family status, mentions their gender, it's like, no, don't tell us. And, that's HR 101 is because that risk aversion to a lawsuit. And so I think a lot of the barriers come from that, and we need to start undoing it. And so we're having conversations about looking at people's, and also, the traditional job announcement is you have to have X number of years of experience plus a certain degree. And so we're having a lot of conversations now, and we aren't good at it yet, about lived experience and really pushing managers on what kind of experience do you need to be successful in this job? And do you really need, I'll use a recruiter job because I know we're going to have one coming up here soon, is do we really need somebody to have a bachelor's or a master's and 4 years of experience doing HR recruitment, or do we need somebody that's got the interpersonal skills, that's had community contact, can do outreach for us, and can generate applicants, And so really looking at, well, what's critical for this position? And then the next step is, once we've defined what's really critical, is making sure that not just the hiring manager, but everybody on that panel, because God knows that government loves to do panel interviews, that everybody on that panel understands how to translate those skills. So when somebody comes in and says, I was a community advocate for 4 years, and they're going, well, but we're hiring for a recruiter, that they know the follow-up question to ask, well, tell us how that translates. Tell us, and because let me tell you, there's a lot of transferable skills in that. And so that's where we need to get to, and where I see our organization and others moving to. But yeah, we aren't very, very good at it because we've been so trained to be risk averse to that lawsuit.
Hi, my name's Kieran. I go by he. And so I run a nonprofit environmental group. We've got about 170 employees, and most of my employees are in largish liberal cities, and our organization and most of our job applicants, they skew toward the progressive community. Yes, as far as I know, I don't think I've got any trans or non-binary people on staff. And, we've got some good policies, written policies, and a diversity statement on our webpage with job applications and so forth. But nonetheless, I don't have such folks working here, where I don't think we're getting very many applicants either. So I'm wondering, what are things that we could do to get more applicants? Because what we're doing so far seems not to be working.
First, I'm going to try and say, and go back to what you said, as far as And that's likely to remain that way if they don't feel comfortable. And a policy or mission statement is not going to make them more comfortable coming out. And there really isn't a one set way to fix that. There is simply, like, leading by example, leading by reputation when it comes to certain businesses. In particular, nonprofits live off their reputation or die. And that's going to have to be part of it. Somebody asked me one time, well, how do I know if somebody is or not? I'm saying, okay, decide you want to change something, come up with a policy. Every time you have a meeting, everybody introduces themselves, everybody uses pronouns. Because even if it's not their issue, they're not going to care. They're not going to know why they had to just say, oh, I use he. But if they are, they're going to appreciate at least that simple step from the start.
I'm glad you asked. When I was growing up in New England, Pratt & Whitney put out a call for what was the equivalent of diverse employees. At that point, it was, Pratt & Whitney, United Technologies now, I guess. High tech. They had contracts with the government. They had contracts specifically with NASA, the Air Force, all kinds of stuff to build things that fly and go boom and all that. Here's the thing. They threw up their hands and had a big public statement in the print media, because that print was still king, about we looked and we didn't find anybody. They couldn't find any women. They couldn't find any people of color who were qualified to do the job. And then somebody came along and said, well, if you don't see them, one, you're probably not looking in the right place. They're not going to fall out of the sky. And two, if you really think there aren't any, then start making some. Reach out into the communities that you're trying to include and offer mentorships and offer other kinds of paid opportunities to study. How many people have been to Salt and Straw? Look at that. Does anybody know about their policy on hiring and diversity? They are totally out there. They have a movie. They have a video. It's on YouTube talking about how they get together as a team, how they talk about these issues, how they work through it, how they are proactive in hiring from our diverse community. That's top down, in the middle, and people who just got hired have a voice in what's going on at the ice cream place of all places. So you can do this. You can find the people that you're looking for. I can tell you I will never apply because that's not my interest. But I know lots of people who wish they had and who feel like their time has passed. Maybe they still have an interest in environmental things and how to take care of the environment and how to monetize doing the right thing. But no one came looking for them, and when they went out looking for that thing, they didn't find you. And if they did, they didn't have a BA in this and maybe an MS in that and, whatever. So, and Alexis is right. As far as you don't have anybody that you might be looking for. Create the space. And maybe you'll start to see something proactively. Let everybody in the company know this is what we're doing. This is our thing now. Go find some people. Go to where people will gather. Have them find you. Be visible.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Henry, and I'm a little shaky. I go by he, him, they, them. So I'm trans and non-binary and genderqueer and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you. I'm a little bit shaky. So I guess I feel like a lot of people are starting to understand or hear about trans people, not so much for trans guys, but I'd like to hear more about gender non-conforming, non-binary things that are happening in the workplace, how how that, what companies are doing for folks, because I know a lot of folks who don't transition medically. I transitioned years ago non-medically, and then I transitioned medically. So I feel like there's a distinction there, and not everybody understands that. People are like, oh, now you're male or now you're female. It's like, yeah, but there's a lot more. And so I'd like to hear more about that.
And you're right about that. A lot of organizations are just now getting used to the term transgender. And then I actually heard somebody actually say, what's gender non-conforming? You guys just come up with all kinds of things now. I'm like, okay, whatever. But the reality of it is that it is not as known. Let's put it that way. It used to be that if somebody was assigned female at birth and they dressed like a male, then they were considered a tomboy. Well, in some circles, that's gender non-conforming. And so you'll have some businesses or older generations go, oh, well, no, that's just a tomboy. No, it's not. And then you try to explain to them. So they're still resistant to the concept that the binary is not here and here, but way down there and way the hell over there. And until they start adjusting to the fact that transgender doesn't mean A to B and B back to A, but A all the way to Z and everything in between, few numbers, characters, and everything else, until they understand that, then that's going to be the problem, and we're going to be asked to educate them on that. We're going to be asked a lot of times to give a story we don't want to do because we're tired of hearing our own story. However, things don't get changed unless there's people who are willing to put that out there at least every once in a while to try to spark somebody to at least think.
Your particular situation in workplace environment, right? It's really hard. It's really hard, and I get that. We had, surprise, similar kinds of issues when I first joined the Q Center. And there were no secrets about that. It was not, I don't know if anybody knows, back in the day, just a handful of years ago, the Q Center was a hot mess and almost closed. And some people in our big chosen family were like, it's about damn time. How bad did it have to get that we started eating our own young? And that's a reflection of what we're looking at on the outside. And we got way more pissed because this was in our living room. This was our safer space. So what we had to do was reinvent and reimagine the Q Center. And that gave me some of the tools I needed to do the same thing in the business community. When people ask me, what do I want? Sometimes they're taken aback because I have a list. I'm like, I'm armed and ready. I got my stuff. I think about it and I rethink and reevaluate constantly. So when someone fools around and asks me, I'm ready. You don't have to do that. It will help if you do. Show up packing. Just think, okay, let's take the roof off and go, if I walked in and I wanted to work in this spot, what would I need right now? Well, that's cool. That's one way to get around it. Be your own boss. That is not a privilege I have. I can't get those resources. I don't have that education. And I am just now at 62, a freshman in college. At 62. Thank you. I appreciate the applause. Show up in about 6 years when I have my master's. And then do a stomp, because I'll have something then more than intention. Oh, y'all coming. Okay? Because I am entrenched in Portland, so you'll know about it. It'll be on. And some people, they'll only find out on Facebook, and I'll just deign to do that. But you all have the power. All of you have the power. Some more than other because of your white privilege. Don't wear it like an embarrassment. Wear it like the thing you've been living with without even realizing you had it, and go use it. Take that power out for a spin and do the right thing with it. That's how we are going to make the change happen in our lifetime, right in the here and now, and for the little baby queers that are coming up behind us, just sneaking up, already taking for granted that they can get their chosen gender marker on an ID, that they don't have to hang their entire life on a courthouse wall and be doxxed by evil people. I had to go through that. I was probably part of the last wave as I went with Basic Rights Oregon to pursue legislation that changed that and changed the gender marker on IDs. That I knew I couldn't do it for me, but the next bunch of kids coming up, they don't even know that that's a thing, that it was ever a thing, and that's great. So, be that change. Do that thing, and then turn to the people around you and say, be that change, and let's get together and do that change together. That's how we're going to make it happen.
Yes, and I think to that point, where we started from, we were talking about laws and policies, it's not enough. Kind of where the non-binary movement within the workplace is at is now there are at least with license and IDs in this state, in California, and DC, it's starting to happen. And so there's more awareness. And for younger people, there's more younger people identifying as non-binary. And at least on the corporate side, there is some change happening there, greater awareness, and that's how it starts. And I think to Geeta's awesome point at the very end of this is we all have power in this room in different ways. We also don't in other ways, right? But where we do have power, that's where we are going to be able to impact the culture here in Portland for those of us who are within trans and non-binary communities. And so we're not going to go around and ask everyone what one personal action is that you'll take, but I hope that you are inspired today to learn more, to read more, to check out the report, that at least to hear from other trans and non-binary people who live here in the area of just what experiences are like. And if you do work in an organization, if you are in a leadership position and you're wondering, what could we do? That's a good place. That's a good question to ask. If you want to be a part of collaboration, please, if we don't have your email, make sure that you share it with us, because we're just getting started in terms of the LGBT chamber and trying to leverage what power we have to try to make things better for trans and non-binary people in our communities. So think about that personal action. If you can take an organizational action to do it, just like the very last thing is, again, if you are trans, non-binary, you're interested in business, please consider being a part of our advisory council. And this is where it's getting started. If we do have your email, we're going to be sending just a short evaluation of what you liked about this panel, what we could do better next time, because we are going to try to engage community just to share more of what we know and also to be honest of what we need to learn more of. And it's pretty cool that we're at PSU, because hopefully there's some researchers in the room who might be inspired by this to do some of the research to help us understand more about where the gaps are and what we could be doing. So I thank you for your attention, the amount of people that are here. That's an awesome sign. And talk to us. We want to work with you and keep doing good work. So thank you. And don't forget to get food and talk with other people and have a good time. And thank you. Thanks, everyone.